So let's talk about some of the major cultural contexts that developed from this sort of historical background of the Spanish Golden Age. So one of our first cultural contexts we're going to talk about is nationality. And the years and years and centuries of conflict and isolation, especially with regards to fighting the Muslims, lead to a fierce and diehard nationalism being a huge part of what it means to be Spanish. Among other things, right, this Muslim conflict develops a real love for the feudal system. So, where you would think, for instance, we talked about Philip III doing a pretty lousy job taking care of the people. The Spanish people, the everyday people, not the nobles, are so obsessed with everything Spanish and how great it is that they won't question anything Spanish, and even though they're suffering and being neglected by their king, they still love the nobility at all costs. The other real key value, and the point is already up here, is the idea that military power, both individual ability to be a soldier and wield a sword and be powerful and violent, but also the larger global idea of the Spanish Navy. Even though the Spanish Navy is wrecked during the 1600s, during the Golden Age, and falling apart, basically we have this firm belief in to be Spanish is to be militarily strong. And this obsessive national pride means that you can't question anything Spanish. One of the things that does come out of this is a nationwide embrace of arts and literature. Again, during the Spanish Golden Age, Spanish power has waned. It's a much more isolationist nation. There's a lot of poverty. There are a lot of problems. In spite of this, the Spanish people, both the nobles and the everyday people, really double down on this idea that being Spanish is great. And it's a really interesting contrast that results in something unexpected, a nationwide embrace of Spanish arts and Spanish literature. And there's all kinds of stuff that I'll talk about later that's going on during this era. Ultimately, what it amounts to is entertainment as escapism. And so one of the questions we want to ask ourselves as we move through Life's a Dream, the play, is this just a simple escapist play, or is there something else going on here? So to go along with that obsessive deal of nationality, let's talk about being obsessive about race. So if you are Spanish, racial purity is essential. Clean ancestry is a big deal. To be able to trace your roots to Spanish people only, going back and back and back and back, is tremendously important. As opposed to a lot of the Spanish people who, because they were conquered by Muslims for 500 years, there is natural intermixing of races that happens there. That is kind of looked down upon from a racial standpoint in Spain, which is a huge problem, obviously. So racial purity is a big deal. And then because they were conquered by Moors for so long, and here are two sort of quintessential images of the Islamic or Moorish person who conquered Spain. This is an old one. This is a little bit more contemporary. We're talking about threatening, dangerous stereotypes. You can look almost exactly at the way that Elizabethan England perceived people like Othello. It's very much the same here, except it's a lot more personal because foreigners have come and conquered our country in recent memory and conquered it for quite a long time. Also, we're going to put Jews on that list. The Spanish people being, and we'll talk about this in a minute, really super Catholic, do not like Jews and really have a lot of the problematic anti-Jewish stereotypes that we see throughout history. In terms of social class, the upper class ignores the poverty, and the lower class unquestionably loves the nobility. And that really odd dynamic is sort of another quintessential idea of what's going on in Spain at the time. We have an upper class who doesn't care about the lower class. And we have a lower class who unquestionably loves the upper class. So if we're talking about Life's a Dream as a whole, we have a proud but deeply struggling Spanish nation. What does this play have to say to this audience in Spain at the time about race? Now, there aren't any characters of different race, but there are characters of different national backgrounds. And about social class and about nationality. How is Life's a Dream a yay rah go Spain kind of a play? Okay. One of the big deals and a theme that is woven all throughout Life's a Dream is this obsessive Spanish idea of male honor. And there are a couple elements of male honor that we're talking about here. And guys, here I'm talking about, and this isn't just in Spain, it's also in Italy and France and to some degree England, but Spain is really at the top of the list of honor-obsessed countries of this era. If you are a man, among the things that you must do to protect and demonstrate the excellence of your honor is you must always do what you say. If a Spanish person says, I will do this, then that word That promise has created a necessary bond, and you have to do what you said you were going to do, whatever it is. So keep an eye on that, track that as we go through Life's a Dream. Who promises what to whom, and how do those things work out in the end? Then, you guys are very familiar with the whole European glove slap duel to the death with sword stereotype. This thing was basically invented in Spain. Other countries are doing it, but the Spanish are obsessed with it. Duels are the primary means of dispute resolution. And by dispute, I mean like, hey, I think you insulted me. Let's sword fight to the death. And that's just expected. So simple things like insults are a really big deal. And we'll talk about the way women were treated in this larger context of male honor in a minute. So there is, I promise I will do this. I got to follow through on it. And there is also, you have wronged me. I will avenge myself against you by killing you. And that is the only option when it comes to honor, is death, or you've lost your honor. The other little bit of this, and for those of you who know Don Quixote, there's a little Don Quixote illustration on the right. If you are a Spanish male, you also must go off in the world and pursue heroic adventure. Basically, this is a good way to get nobles to serve in the military, because they want to go off and have grand adventures and conquer other nations and do awesome things far away. This is a narrative that's still pursued today in military recruiting, and I think it's completely legitimate. So here's Calderon, our playwright, a guy who is living in Spain at the time and is a religious person as well. And he can't directly criticize his audience and say, all this honor stuff you're doing is really stupid. So he's got to support the notion of honor a little bit, but I would argue he also criticizes it a little bit here and there. So let's kind of talk about the different ways in which those different obligations of honor track out through the play. Then let's talk for a minute about how women are treated. The definition of Spanish womanhood is to be the vessel in which the man's honor is contained, which is so completely ridiculous, but that's almost as literally how it would be, right? I am a Spanish noble. My honor is contained on my person, and my honor is also contained in my wife. So if she's walking out in the world and she is besmirched or insulted, I must duel to the death with whoever did that, right? Also, if she does anything wrong, I, as a Spanish nobleman, can pretty much do whatever I want. Basically, if you think your wife's been unfaithful, you are allowed by law to murder her, and no trial is necessary. So we have a sort of repeat of the same story we've been telling all semester. Women are second-class citizens. They're basically property. Specifically, the way they operate under this code of honor is even more of an object than they are in other countries. I mean, if you can imagine, a Spanish nobleman just suspects his wife is cheating on him. He kills her and suffers no legal repercussions at all. But we do have acting. We have women on the stage in Madrid in 1587. This whole long-standing moral concern about, women and actresses, and they might be prostitutes, all this other stuff, the Spanish say, nah, forget it. We're going to put women on stage playing women. So that's a really interesting thing. It's a little controversial when it happens, and it requires male consent. Typically, a Spanish woman has to have her brother or her father or her husband as a member of the same acting company. But still, it's relatively progressive. We're moving forward a little bit here, right? We are allowing women into the theater in this era, but we're keeping them in separate seating areas. So just as a very brief overview of how gender is treated in Spain, it's an odd kind of mix of things. On one hand, we trust women to be moral and upstanding enough to be on stage and portray other characters. On the other hand, we're still treating them as vessels of honor, as basically objects, and we're keeping them separate from men because we don't want the women to get in trouble, I guess, right? Obviously, when we talk about women, one of our main characters in this play is a woman, and I want you to tell me how Calderon is both supporting everything the Spanish believe about gender and also maybe pushing the envelope a little bit, maybe tweaking the ideas slightly to complicate some of those Spanish ideas of gender. And religion. So, long story short, Spain is an obsessively Catholic nation. They are probably as or more Catholic than Italy, and they use Catholicism as a sort of boost to this existing obsession, this nationalistic obsession with all things Spanish. So we're talking about a really staunchly Catholic nation. How staunch? They do pull off the Spanish Inquisition, which nobody expects. And we tend to think of the Spanish Inquisition being something that is much more about torture, and certainly that happened quite a lot. But it's more about expulsion, and it's mainly directed at Jews and Moors. So what we're trying to do from a Spanish religious standpoint is not necessarily torture sinners and not always put sinners on trial. This is an auto de fe. This is a giant public trial of heretics. Those are certainly ideas that are a big deal here, but really what Spain did was they used the Inquisition as an excuse to get all non-Spanish people out of the country. And this is an unrelated anecdote, but I saw recently in some dramaturgy work for the play The Diary of Anne Frank, somebody had put up a map of the Jewish population of Europe in 1933, because obviously that's relevant to that play, right? On this map, the numbers in Germany, there were like 500,000 Jews. In Russia, there were 2.6 million Jews. In France, there are several 100,000 Jews. In 1933, in Spain, there were 4,000 Jews. That's it. That's how effectively the Inquisition worked to get all the Jews and all the Moors or Islamic people out of the country, which is a pretty shocking thing. But that's how how obsessed they were with this national identity and racial purity. The Inquisition did all of this under the umbrella of Catholicism. And let's talk again briefly about Catholicism. We'll jump back to the medieval lecture, and I just want to remind you of this Catholic philosophy. Catholics believe that every human will sin, that once you've sinned, you must confess your sins, that after confession, you will be given penance, some sort of punishment or act of contrition that you have to do. And once that happens, you will be forgiven of that sin. Calderón is a highly Catholic person and believes very firmly in this cycle of sin, confession, penance, and forgiveness. And so one of the things I want you to do is think about this way this guy, Calderón, is looking at Spain. He says, you guys are all pretending to be really super Catholic, but that's what you're preaching. I can't help but look around and say, in practice, everyone's walking around with a sword on their hip, just waiting for the opportunity to stab another guy because they thought they had their honor insulted. Additionally, he notes that overall, the royalty and the nobility are partying and totally ignoring the common people. So there's that as well. So Calderón, as a playwright who's a deeply religious person, sees some serious contradictions with regards to religion and regards to the way that the Catholic Spain is actually behaving. And that contradiction is kind of a big deal. So how does Life's a Dream both reflect and criticize religious practice in Spain? It criticizes the contradictions in religious practice, especially with the idea of honor. And again, as you've already done a little bit, hopefully with the play, go back through and trace those obligations of honor and look at how they should have ended and look at how Calderón causes them to end, because that's a pretty big change. All right, that's the end of segment 2. We'll come back in a minute with segment 3, and we'll talk about the performance context of Golden Age Spain.